My daughter rolled her eyes when I installed the tracking app, called me paranoid when I ran background checks on her friends' boyfriends. "Dad, you're suffocating me," Emma said, slamming her bedroom door. I thought maybe she was right, maybe. I was being too protective, too controlling. That was 3 months ago. Last Friday night, everything changed. Emma's best friend Sarah went on what seemed like a perfect first date with a charming guy from college. Dinner, movies, the whole romantic package. But when Sarah didn't answer her phone by midnight, Emma started panicking. By 2 a.m., we were driving through empty parking lots, following the GPS ping from Sarah's phone. What we found in that abandoned warehouse will haunt me forever. The police said if we'd arrived 20 minutes later, Sarah wouldn't have made it. Now Emma understands why some fathers never stop watching. Sometimes being overbearing saves. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 48 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been raising my daughter Emma alone. My wife died in a car accident when Emma was 15. A drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon. Since then, every protective instinct I've ever had has been amplified tenfold. I work as a security consultant, which means I know exactly how dangerous the world can be. I've seen crime scenes, reviewed security footage of attacks, analyzed patterns of predators. It's made me hyper-aware of threats that most parents never even consider. Emma calls it paranoia. I call it preparation. The tracking app was just common sense. Emma's 18 now, a freshman at the local community college, with fair skin that flushes pink when she's angry and blonde hair she inherited from her mother. She's beautiful, trusting, and completely naive about the wolves that circle girls. Like her. "Dad, this is insane," she'd said when I showed her the family location sharing feature. Her blue eyes, my eyes, blazed with frustration. "You can't monitor my every move forever, but I could try." I'd lost one person I loved, senseless violence. I wasn't going to lose another. Emma's best friend Sarah was the complete opposite of my cautious daughter. Where Emma questioned everything, Sarah dove in headfirst. She was a bubbly blonde with an infectious laugh and the kind of trusting nature that made me want to wrap her in bubble wrap too. Her parents were decent people, but they worked long hours and trusted their daughter's judgment implicitly, too implicitly. In my opinion, Sarah came bouncing through our front door that Tuesday afternoon, practically glowing with excitement. Her fair cheeks were flushed, and she clutched her phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Emma, you'll never believe who I met in my psychology class," she gushed, collapsing onto our couch with dramatic flair. "His name is Derek Coleman, and he's absolutely perfect." I was in the kitchen, supposedly making coffee, but actually listening to every word. Perfect was exactly what worried me. In my experience, nothing was ever perfect, especially not men who seemed too good to be true. "He's a junior, studying psychology with a minor in sociology," Sarah continued, showing Emma her phone screen. "Look at his Instagram. He volunteers at animal shelters, reads poetry, and look at those eyes." Through the doorway, I caught a glimpse of the phone screen. Clean-cut guy, sandy brown hair, green eyes, generic college campus photos. Everything looked normal, which in itself was suspicious. Most people had messy, authentic social media lives. This looked curated. "He asked me out for Friday night," Sarah announced, and I nearly dropped my coffee mug the next morning. I did. What any responsible security professional would do. I ran Derek Coleman through every database I had access to. What I found made my skin crawl. There were 3 Derek Colemans enrolled at our local college over the past 5 years. One was a sophomore from Michigan studying engineering. One was a graduate student in his late 20s. The third had dropped out 2 years ago and moved to Oregon. None of them matched the profile Sarah had described. Printed out the information and waited for Emma to come home from her morning classes. When she walked through the door, her backpack slung over her shoulder, and her pale hands still cold. From the October air, I was ready. "We need to talk about Sarah's new boyfriend," I said. Spreading the papers across the kitchen table, Emma's expression immediately shifted to that familiar mix of frustration and resignation. "Dad, please don't tell me you're investigating Sarah's date. Someone using a false identity enrolled in your friend's psychology class," I said, pointing to the documentation. None of these Derek Colemans matched the description Sarah gave us. Emma barely glanced at the papers. "Maybe he goes by his middle name. Maybe he transferred schools. Maybe you got the wrong records." Her voice rose with each word, her fair complexion flushing with anger. "Maybe you need to stop treating everyone like a criminal. Emma, listen to me." "No." She slammed her hand on the table, making the papers scatter. "You did this with Jake. You did it with Marcus. And now you're doing it with Sarah's date. You can't investigate every person who enters our lives." She was referring to the background checks I'd run on her previous boyfriends. Jake had been clean honor student. No criminal record, good family. Marcus had a juvenile record for shoplifting that his parents had never mentioned. I'd been right to be concerned about Marcus, but Emma saw it as invasion of privacy. "This is different," I insisted. "The identity inconsistencies are real red flags. You know what's a red flag?" Emma's blue eyes flashed with fury. "A father who can't let his 18-year-old daughter have a normal social life. Sarah finally meets a nice guy, and you're already trying to destroy it with your conspiracy theories." She stormed toward the stairs, her blonde hair swishing behind her like a war banner. At the bottom step, she turned back. "I'm going to help Sarah get ready for her date Friday night. And if you try to interfere, if you call her parents or do anything to sabotage this, I will never forgive you." The bedroom door slam echoed through the house like a gunshot. I stared at the scattered papers, my security training warring with my desire to maintain what was left of my relationship with my daughter. Emma was all I had left in the world, and every overprotective instinct was pushing her further away. But Derek Coleman, whoever he really was, felt wrong. 30 years of reading people had given me instincts I trusted more than social conventions. Something about this situation made every alarm bell in my head ring simultaneously. The question was, how could I protect Sarah without destroying my relationship with Emma forever? Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Sarah had been at our house since 3 o'clock, transforming Emma's bedroom into a beauty salon explosion of curling irons, makeup palettes, and outfit combinations. I stayed downstairs, pretending to work on client reports while listening to the girls' excited chatter filtering through the ceiling. Sarah's infectious laughter mixed with Emma's encouraging comments as they prepared for what Sarah clearly believed would be the perfect first date. "Do you think the blue dress is too much?" Sarah called down the stairs. "Derek said we're going somewhere nice." "You look amazing," Emma replied. "He's going to die when he sees you." Poor choice of words. I thought grimly. At 5:30, Emma emerged from her room wearing a triumphant smile. Her fair skin glowed with the satisfaction of a successful makeover mission, and her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite not being the one going on the date. "Dad," she said, her tone carefully measured, "Sarah wants to meet Derek outside. He's picking her up in 10 minutes. This was my moment. I could push the issue, demand to meet Derek face to face, insist on getting his license plate number and contact information. I could activate full protective mode and potentially save Sarah from whatever danger my instincts were screaming about. Could also lose my daughter forever. Emma's blue eyes held a challenge and a plea simultaneously. She was asking me to trust her judgment, to let her friend make her own choices, to be the normal father she desperately wanted instead of the hypervigilant guardian I'd become. "Okay," I said quietly, "but I want Sarah to share her location with both of us tonight, just as a safety precaution." Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly. She already said yes to that. She thinks it's smart. At least someone in this situation. Had common sense. Sarah bounced down the stairs in a blue sundress that brought out her eyes, her fair skin practically glowing with anticipation. She'd chosen low heels and a light cardigan, sensible choices that suggested Derek had given her appropriate information about their destination. "How do I look, Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, spinning once in our entryway. "Beautiful," I said honestly. "And smart for sharing your location tonight." "Oh, absolutely. My parents always taught me to be safe." She hugged Emma goodbye, then surprised me with a quick hug too. "Thanks for letting Emma help me get ready. You raised an amazing daughter." Through the front window, I watched a silver sedan pull up to our curb. The driver remained in the car, another red flag. A gentleman meeting his date's family was basic courtesy, especially on a first date. There he is. Sarah grabbed her purse and checked her reflection one final time in the hallway mirror. "Wish me luck." Emma and I stood at the window, watching. Sarah walked toward the car. In the driver's seat, I caught a glimpse of Derek Coleman, or whoever he really was. Medium build, dark hair, sunglasses despite the evening hour. The passenger door opened. Sarah got in, and they drove away. Emma was still smiling, but I felt like I just watched a lamb walk into a wolf's den. "See," Emma said softly. "Sometimes you have to let people make their own choices." I pulled out my phone and opened the location-sharing app. Sarah's blue dot appeared on the map, moving steadily toward downtown. At least I'd be watching. Sarah's first text came at 6:45 p.m. "Oh my God. Emma, he took me to Castellanos. This place is so fancy." Castellanos was the most expensive restaurant in town, the kind of place where reservations required weeks of advance planning. Either Derek Coleman was impressively organized, or he had connections that concerned me, even more. Emma showed me the message, practically glowing with vicarious excitement. "See? He's treating her like a princess." The texts continued throughout the evening. 7:15 p.m. He ordered wine. "I feel so sophisticated." 7:45 p.m. He's telling me about his volunteer work with homeless shelters. Could he be more perfect? 8:30 p.m. Dessert time. He remembered I mentioned loving chocolate cake from our first conversation. Each message made Emma happier and made my anxiety worse. Derek was hitting every note perfectly too perfectly. In my experience, men who seemed flawless on first dates were usually hiding the biggest secrets. But Emma was relaxing for the first time in months, her pale hands no longer tense as she replied to Sarah's updates with heart emojis and excited commentary. I forced myself to stay quiet, monitoring their location on my phone instead of voicing my concerns. At 9:30, the restaurant messages stopped. The location showed they'd left Castellanos and were heading toward the movie theater complex on the east side of town. Normal second date activity dinner, and a movie was classic for a reason. 9:45 p.m. Movie time. He let me pick. We're seeing that new romantic comedy I mentioned. 10 p.m. Sarah's location went stationary at the theater complex. For the next 90 minutes, I tried to focus on work while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. But my eyes kept drifting to my phone, watching Sarah's blue dot remain fixed. At the cinema. "Dad, you're being weird," Emma said without looking up from her chemistry textbook. Her blonde hair fell across her face as she worked, so much like her mother's that it made my chest ache. "Just checking that she's okay. She's at the movies." What could possibly happen at the movies? At 11:45 p.m., Sarah's location began moving again. The dot traveled from the theater toward downtown, then took an unexpected turn onto Highway 47, the road that led out of town toward the industrial district. My stomach dropped. "Emma," I said carefully, "has Sarah ever mentioned Derek living outside town?" Emma looked up from her textbook, her blue eyes confused. "No, why? I showed her the phone screen. They're heading toward the old warehouse district. That's not exactly a normal route home. Emma frowned at the map. Maybe he's taking the scenic route? Or maybe he lives out there. At midnight, Sarah's location stopped moving entirely. The blue dot sat stationary on a stretch of Highway 47 that I knew well from my security consulting work. An area filled with abandoned buildings and empty lots where the old manufacturing plants used to operate. No one went there at midnight unless they were up to something illegal. Or something worse. Emma, try calling Sarah, I said, my voice sharper than intended. Emma's frown deepened, but she dialed. A call went straight to voicemail. Her phone might be dead, Emma said, but uncertainty crept into her voice for the first time all evening. Tried Derek's number, which Sarah had given Emma earlier. Straight to voicemail as well. The blue dot hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Something was very, very wrong. Try again, I said, watching the motionless blue dot on my screen like it might suddenly spring to life. Emma dialed Sarah's number a second time. Voicemail again. Maybe they stopped for gas, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her fair complexion was paling, and she kept tucking her blonde hair behind her ears, a nervous habit she developed after her mother died. Emma, look at the map. I showed her exactly where Sarah's location had stopped. There's nothing out there except abandoned warehouses and empty lots. No gas stations, no restaurants, no legitimate reason to stop. Emma studied the screen, her blue eyes widening as the implications sank in. Maybe ... maybe they're just talking? Like, parked somewhere private? I wanted to believe that. I desperately wanted this to be an overprotective father's paranoid imagination running wild. But 3 decades of security work had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming danger. Call her parents, I said. Dad, it's not even 12:30 yet. Sarah's curfew isn't until 1 a.m. Call them anyway. Emma's hands shook slightly as she dialed the Hoffman's home number. Mrs. Hoffman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy with sleep. Hi, Mrs. Hoffman, it's Emma. I'm so sorry to wake you, but ... is Sarah home yet? I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Emma's expression told me everything I needed to know. No, she's not home, Emma said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. They assumed she'd be back by curfew. The blue dot still hadn't moved. I grabbed my car keys. We're going to find her. Dad, wait. Maybe we're overreacting. Maybe. Emma. I turned to face my daughter, letting her see the full weight of my concern. In 30 years of security work, I've learned to recognize patterns. Men don't take 18-year-old girls to abandoned warehouse districts at midnight for innocent reasons. Emma's face went completely pale. For the first time since this whole situation began, she looked genuinely frightened. What ... what do you think is happening to her? I didn't want to answer that question. I didn't want to put those possibilities into words where Emma could hear them. But my daughter was old enough to understand the stakes. I think Derek Coleman isn't who he claims to be, and Sarah is in serious danger. Emma grabbed her jacket without another word of argument. As we headed toward the garage, she tried calling Sarah one more time. The call went straight to voicemail again, but this time something was different. Dad, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah's phone just went offline completely. Her location disappeared. I stared at the phone screen. Where Sarah's blue dot had been for the past hour, there was now nothing but empty map. Either Sarah's phone had died completely, or someone had deliberately turned it off. We needed to get to that warehouse district immediately. Call 911, I told Emma as we backed out of the driveway. Tell them we have a missing person who may be in danger. Emma's pale hands trembled as she dialed, her voice shaking as she tried to explain the situation to the emergency dispatcher. The clock on my dashboard read 12:47 a.m. We were racing against time, and I was terrified We might already be too late. The 911 dispatcher was polite, but unhelpful. Sir, we need to wait 24 hours before filing a missing person report, unless there's evidence of immediate danger. Her phone went dark in an abandoned industrial area at midnight, I said, speeding through downtown while Emma clutched. The dashboard. How much more evidence do you need? I understand your concern, but teenagers often turn off their phones when they don't want to be tracked. We'll need. I hung up. We were on our own. Emma tried calling Sarah again as we drove, her pale fingers gripping the phone like a lifeline. Still nothing. Derek's number remained disconnected as well. Where exactly did her signal disappear? Emma asked, her voice small. In the darkness of the car, I pulled up the location history on my phone, reviewing the route Sarah's signal had taken. Highway 47, about 3 miles past the old textile plant. There's a cluster of warehouses in that area. Most of them have been empty since the factory closures. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier than I expected. Dad, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you about Derek. You were right to be suspicious. Let's focus on finding Sarah, I said, but her words meant more to me than she could know. For months, I'd felt like I was fighting a losing battle against my daughters. Need for independence. Now, when it truly mattered, she was finally hearing me. We reached the industrial district at 1:15 a.m. The area was a graveyard of American manufacturing row after row of dark buildings with broken windows and rusted metal siding. Security lighting was sparse, creating pools of yellow illumination separated by vast stretches of shadow. I pulled over at the spot where Sarah's phone had last pinged and killed the engine. The silence was immediately oppressive. No traffic. Sounds, no human activity. Just the distant hum of highway noise carried on the October wind. Her signal stopped somewhere around here, I said, consulting the phone again. But I can't pinpoint the exact building. Emma peered through the windshield at the maze of abandoned structures. How are we supposed to search all of this? Systematically and carefully. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out 2 flashlights, part of the emergency kit I'd maintained since Emma was born. We stick together, check each building methodically, and we don't take any unnecessary risks. As we stepped out of the car, Emma moved closer to me, her fair skin almost luminous in the pale moonlight. For the first time in months, she wasn't fighting my protective instincts, she was grateful for them. Dad, she whispered, what if we're too late? I handed her a flashlight and tried to project confidence I didn't feel. Then we make sure Derek Coleman pays for what he's done. The first warehouse loomed ahead of us like a tomb. The next 3 warehouses were completely empty, stripped of equipment years ago, leaving behind only concrete floors and rusted support beams. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but debris and graffiti left by urban explorers. Maybe we should call the police again, Emma whispered as we approached the 4th building. Her blonde hair caught the beam of my flashlight as she turned her head, listening for any sound that might indicate human presence. Not yet. They'll waste time asking questions we can't answer. I examined the entrance to the next warehouse. This one's different. Unlike the previous buildings, this warehouse had a newer padlock on the main door. The chain was clean recently installed, and the area around the entrance showed signs of regular used tire tracks in the dirt, cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by months of rain. Someone's been using this building, I said, running my finger along the tire tracks. Recently. Emma moved closer, her fair skin pale in the moonlight. Do you think? A sound from inside the warehouse cut her off, faint but unmistakable. A voice, muffled but human, calling for help. Sarah, Emma breathed. I pressed my ear to the metal door. The sound came again, definitely a woman's voice, weak but persistent. My security training kicked in as I assessed the situation. One entrance that we could see, probably more around the building, Unknown number of people inside. Derek could be armed. Emma, I need you to go back to the car and call 911 again. Tell them we've found Sarah, and we need immediate police response. I'm not leaving you alone. This isn't a negotiation. If Derek is in there, this could get dangerous very quickly. Emma's blue eyes flashed with familiar stubbornness. Sarah is my best friend. I'm not abandoning her. Before I could argue further, the voice from inside grew louder, more desperate. Sarah was calling Emma's name. I made a decision that went against every tactical protocol I'd ever learned. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say when I say it. If I tell you to run, you run back to the car and drive away. Do you understand? Emma nodded, her face set with determination that reminded me painfully of her mother. I examined the padlock more closely. It was good quality, but not impossible to deal with. In my car's emergency kit, I had bolt cutters, a security consultant's tool that Emma had always teased me about carrying. Watch the perimeter, I told Emma. Let me know if you see any movement, any lights, anything at all. It took 3 minutes to cut through the chain. The padlock fell to the ground with a metallic clang that seemed deafeningly loud in the industrial silence. I eased the door open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. The warehouse was larger than the others, with a maze of interior walls that had been added later, creating smaller rooms within the vast space. Sarah's voice came from somewhere deeper in the building, muffled by walls and distance, but definitely her. Sarah, Emma called softly. We're here. Where are you? The response was immediate. Sarah's voice, crying with relief, calling back from what sounded like a basement or lower-level dot, and then, from a completely different direction, came the sound of footsteps. Derek was still in the building. I grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her behind a concrete support pillar, switching off both our flashlights. The warehouse plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by thin streams of moonlight filtering through broken windows high above Dot. The footsteps continued, measured, deliberate, moving away from us toward the back of the building. Derek was searching for something, or someone. Maybe he'd heard us break in. Sarah. Emma started to call out, but I clamped my hand over her mouth. He doesn't know exactly where we are yet, I whispered directly into her ear. We need to keep it that way. Emma nodded against my hand, and I released her. My mind raced through tactical options. Derek had the advantage of familiarity with the building layout, but we had the element of surprise. He thought Sarah was alone and helpless. He wasn't expecting rescue. Sarah's voice came again, weaker now from somewhere below us. There had to be a basement or lower level accessed by stairs we hadn't seen yet. I pulled out my phone and opened the emergency call I'd started earlier. If something went wrong, Emma could hit send with one button and GPS would guide police to our exact location. I'm going to find Sarah, I whispered to Emma. You stay here by this pillar. If you hear fighting, if you hear Derek coming this way, you run back to the car and drive straight to the police station. Dad, no, we should stick together. Emma, listen to me. I gripped her shoulders, feeling how she trembled despite her brave front. Derek brought Sarah here for a reason. He's dangerous, probably armed, and definitely desperate now that his plan is falling apart. I need to know you're safe so I can focus on getting Sarah out. Emma's fair face was barely visible in the darkness, but I could see her internal struggle. She wanted to help her friend, but she also recognized the reality of our situation. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, the warehouse was silent, except for the distant sound of Sarah's weak voice calling for help. Then Derek spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the empty space. I know someone's in here. Sarah can't have gotten free on her own. My blood ran cold. Derek's tone was calm, controlled, not the panic of someone whose crime had been discovered, but the calculation of someone adapting his plan. This wasn't his first time dealing with complications. Here's what's going to happen. Derek called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Whoever you are, you're going to leave now. You're going to forget you were ever here. Because if you don't, Sarah's going to suffer a lot more before she dies." Emma's intake of breath was sharp enough that I was afraid Derek might hear it. I squeezed her hand, trying to communicate strength I wasn't sure I felt. "I've done this before," Derek continued, moving again. His footsteps were closer now, methodical as he searched the building. "You can't save her, but you can save yourself." That's when I realized the full scope of what we were dealing with. Derek wasn't just a college student with a fake identity who'd gotten carried away on a date. He was a predator who'd done this before, who'd planned this carefully, who knew exactly how to control the situation. Sarah wasn't his first victim, and if we failed tonight, she wouldn't be his last. Derek's footsteps moved systematically through the warehouse, checking each section methodically. He was hunting us with the patience of someone who'd done this before, someone who understood that panic was his enemy's weakness and calm calculation was his strength. I needed to change the dynamic. Instead of letting Derek control the situation, I had to force him to react to me. "Emma," I whispered, barely breathing the words. "When I move, you count to 60. Then call 911. Tell them officer needs assistance, shots fired, whatever gets them here fastest." "Dad, what are you—" "I'm going to get Sarah." I slipped away from the pillar before Emma could argue, moving toward the sound of Derek's footsteps. My security training from decades ago came flooding back. How to move silently, how to use shadows and cover, how to approach a dangerous subject without being detected. Derek was near the center of the warehouse now, still calling out periodically. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Sarah's hurt. She needs medical attention. Help me get her to a hospital." His voice was perfectly reasonable, concerned, the tone of someone trying to help, not harm. It was a masterful manipulation, the kind of psychological control that had probably worked on Sarah earlier in the evening. I found the stairs to the lower level behind a partition wall, concrete steps leading down into basement darkness, with Sarah's voice drifting up from below. She was conscious, which was more than I dared hope. But as I started down the stairs, Derek's footsteps changed direction. He was coming back toward this section of the building. I had maybe 30 seconds before he reached the stairwell. The basement was a maze of small rooms, probably old storage areas or workshops. Sarah's voice was coming from the far end, through what sounded like a heavy door. I followed the sound, my flashlight on its lowest setting, casting just enough light to navigate without advertising my position. I found her in what looked like an old office, hands zip-tied behind her back, ankles bound, but alive and conscious. Her blue dress was torn, her blonde hair disheveled, and she had bruises on her fair skin that made me want to kill Derek with my bare hands. "Mr. Mitchell?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from calling for help. "How did you—" "Emma. Is Emma safe?" "She's safe. We're getting you out of here." I pulled out my pocket knife and cut through the zip ties binding her wrists. "Can you walk?" "I think so. He drugged me at dinner, but it's wearing off." Sarah tried to stand, wobbling but determined. "Mr. Mitchell, he's done this before. He told me about other girls. He has pictures." Footsteps on the concrete stairs above us cut her off. Derek had found the basement entrance. "He's coming," I whispered, helping Sarah toward a second exit I'd spotted on the opposite side of the room. "Can you make it up those stairs?" Sarah nodded, her jaw set with the kind of determination that reminded me why Emma loved her as a friend. But as we reached the far stairwell, Derek's voice echoed down from the main level. "I know you're down there, and I know you found Sarah, but you don't understand the situation you've walked into." His tone had changed, still calm, but with an undertone of something darker. "I have your daughter, Mr. Mitchell. Emma's safe for now, but that depends entirely on your cooperation. My blood turned to ice. I'd left Emma by the pillar, told her to stay hidden, assumed she'd be safe while I rescued Sarah. I'd made the same mistake. Derek had been counting on I'd underestimated him. Come back upstairs, Mr. Mitchell. We need to talk. Every protective instinct I'd ever had screamed at me to rush upstairs, but 30 years of security training held me back. Derek was trying to control the situation by making me emotional, forcing me to react instead of think. Sarah, I whispered, there's a second exit at the top of these stairs. When we get up there, you run. Don't look back. Don't try to help, just run to the road and flag down the first car you see. I can't leave you and Emma. You can and you will. Emma needs you to get help. We climbed the concrete steps slowly, each footfall echoing despite my efforts to move silently. At the top, I cracked open the metal door and peered into the warehouse. Derek stood in the center of the main floor, about 50 feet away. Emma was beside him, her pale hands zip-tied behind her back, her fair face streaked with tears, but her blue eyes blazing with defiance. She was alive and apparently unharmed, but Derek's hand rested on her shoulder in a way that made his control over the situation crystal clear. Mr. Mitchell, Derek called out, his voice carrying easily through the empty space. I can see you by the door. Come out where we can talk properly. I had no choice. Emma's safety depended on my cooperation, at least temporarily. Sarah, when I walk out there, you go. Understand? Sarah nodded, her own pale face determined, despite the terror in her eyes. I stepped into the warehouse, hands visible, my flashlight pointed at the ground. Let her go, Derek. Your problem is with me, not with Emma. Derek smiled, the same charming expression that had probably convinced Sarah to get in his car hours earlier. Actually, Mr. Mitchell, my problem was with your interference. Sarah and I were having a perfectly lovely evening until you decided to play detective. Your lovely evening involved drugging an 18-year-old girl. Sarah consented to dinner. Everything that happened afterward was a natural progression of our relationship. Derek's hand tightened on Emma's shoulder, making her wince. But you couldn't let your daughter's friend make her own choices, could you? You had to investigate, had to interfere, had to try to control everything. The sick irony wasn't lost on me. Derek was using my protective instincts, my tendency toward control, as justification for his crimes. What do you want? I asked. Simple. You and Emma leave. You forget you were ever here. Sarah and I will work out our differences privately, and everyone goes home happy, except Sarah. Derek shrugged. Sarah made her choice when she got in my car tonight. She chose to trust a stranger, chose to drink wine she didn't order, chose to ignore the warning signs that any intelligent person would have recognized. Emma spoke for the first time since I'd emerged from the basement. You're insane. Derek's expression darkened slightly. I'm practical, Emma. Your father understands practical decisions, don't you, Mr. Mitchell? You have to choose. Save one daughter or lose both. Behind Derek, I caught a glimpse of movement near the far wall. Sarah had made it out of the basement and was moving toward the exit, staying in the shadows. Derek hadn't seen her yet. I needed to keep his attention focused on me for just a few more seconds. You're right, I said, taking a step closer. I do understand practical decisions. Derek smiled again, thinking he'd won. That's when I made my move. I lunged forward, closing the distance between Derek and myself in 3 quick steps. My security training kicked in go for the weapon hand first. Control the threat, protect the innocent. Derek was fast, but he hadn't expected me to attack, rather than negotiate. His hand moved toward what I now saw was a knife at his belt, but I reached him first, grabbing his wrist and driving my shoulder into his chest. We went down hard onto the concrete floor. Derek's grip on Emma broken as he fell. Run! I shouted to her, but with her hands zip-tied behind her back, she could barely maintain her balance. Derek was stronger than his lean build suggested, and he fought with the desperate fury of someone whose carefully planned crime was falling apart. He drove his knee toward my ribs, forcing me to roll sideways to avoid the impact. "You have no idea what you've done," Derek snarled, his reasonable facade completely gone. His green eyes blazed with rage as we grappled for control of the knife. Sarah was supposed to disappear quietly. "Now you've made this complicated." I managed to pin his knife hand to the concrete, but Derek used his free hand to claw at my face, trying to reach my eyes. The fight was brutal and desperate, no technique. Just two men trying to survive. From somewhere outside the warehouse, I heard the blessed sound of sirens. Sarah had made it to the road and found help. Derek heard them too, and his expression shifted from rage to calculation. "They'll never prove anything," he gasped, still struggling beneath me. Sarah was drugged. "Her memory will be fuzzy. Emma never saw me commit a crime." "It's your word against mine." That's when Emma's voice cut through the warehouse. "Actually, it's my video against your lies." I glanced over to see Emma holding up her phone with her bound hands, the screen glowing with an active recording. "I've been filming this whole conversation, Derek, including the part where you admitted to drugging Sarah and planning to make her disappear." Derek's face went white with genuine shock. For the first time since we'd entered the warehouse, he looked like what he really was, a 20-something predator whose carefully constructed plan had been destroyed by the technology he hadn't anticipated. The sirens were getting closer. Blue and red lights began flashing through the broken windows of the warehouse, painting the concrete walls in emergency colors. Derek made one last desperate attempt to break free, bucking upward with enough force to nearly throw me off. But I'd spent 30 years learning how to control dangerous situations, and I wasn't about to let him escape now. I shifted my weight, pinning him completely to the floor, just as the warehouse doors burst open and police officers flooded in, flashlights blazing and weapons drawn. "Police! Nobody move!" Finally, it was over. The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and medical examinations. Derek was arrested on multiple charges: kidnapping, assault, possession of controlled substances, and attempted rape. Emma's video provided crucial evidence that turned what might have been a he said, she said situation into an open and shut case. Sarah was taken to the hospital for evaluation and treatment. The drug Derek had slipped into her wine at dinner was Rohypnol, a powerful sedative that explained her disorientation and memory gaps. The doctor said she was lucky. The dose could have been fatal if she'd been smaller or had consumed more alcohol. Emma and I were questioned separately by Detective Martinez, a veteran investigator who specialized in sexual assault cases. She was professional but thorough, walking us through the timeline of events and collecting statements that would be crucial for prosecution. "Your daughter's quick thinking with the video recording may have saved this case," Detective Martinez told me as we wrapped up our statements. Around 4 a.m. Without that evidence, Derek's lawyer would have argued that everything was consensual and that you attacked an innocent man. Emma sat beside me in the police station's waiting area, her blonde hair disheveled and her fair skin pale with exhaustion. The zip ties had left red marks on her wrists as she kept rubbing them absently. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you about Derek," she said quietly. "You were right about everything." "You had no way of knowing how dangerous he really was," I replied, putting my arm around her shoulders. "But you saved Sarah's life tonight with that recording. I'm proud of how brave you were." Detective Martinez returned with coffee and an update on Derek's background check. What she told us made my blood run cold. Derek Coleman isn't his real name. He's actually Marcus Webb, 26 years old, with warrants in 3 states for similar crimes. We've been looking for him for 8 months. She sat down across from us, her expression grim. "Based on evidence we found in the warehouse, we believe Sarah was his 4th victim. The other 3 girls weren't as lucky. Emma's intake of breath was sharp. You mean he's killed people? 2 victims were found dead. 1 is still missing. Detective Martinez's voice was carefully controlled. Sarah was incredibly fortunate that you found her when you did. The medical examiner estimates she had maybe 30 minutes before the drug dose became lethal. The weight of how close we'd come to losing Sarah hit me like a physical blow. If I'd listened to Emma's requests to stop being overprotective, if I'd respected Sarah's right to make her own choices, if I'd been a normal father who trusted his daughter's judgment, Sarah would be dead. Mr. Mitchell, Detective Martinez continued, your background in security consulting probably saved 3 lives tonight. Most parents would have waited for morning or trusted the police timeline for missing person reports. Your decision to act immediately made all the difference. Emma leaned against my shoulder, her exhaustion finally overwhelming her adrenaline. Can we go see Sarah now? The hospital is allowing family visits, Detective Martinez confirmed. She's asking for both of you. As we prepared to leave the police station, I realized that everything had changed between Emma and me. She no longer saw my protective instincts as controlling or paranoid. She understood, in the most visceral way possible, why some fathers never stop watching. Sarah was awake when we arrived at the hospital, though the effects of the drug were still visible in her dilated pupils and occasional disorientation. She was connected to an 4 that was flushing the remaining toxins from her system, and a nurse had treated the rope burns on her wrists and ankles. Emma, she whispered when we entered her room, her voice hoarse from hours of calling for help in the warehouse. I'm so sorry. You are right to be worried. Emma rushed to Sarah's bedside, careful not to disturb the medical equipment. Don't apologize. None of this was your fault. Sarah's parents had arrived an hour earlier and were conferring with doctors. In the hallway, Mr. Hoffman approached me with tears in his eyes and a firm handshake. The police told us what you did, he said, his voice thick with emotion. If you hadn't found her when you did ... Any father would have done the same thing. No, Mr. Hoffman shook his head. Most fathers would have assumed she was safe. Most fathers don't have your training, your instincts, your willingness to act when something feels wrong. He paused, collecting himself. We owe you our daughter's life. Over the next few hours, as Sarah's condition stabilized and the drug worked its way out of her system, she began to remember more details about the evening. The story that emerged was a textbook example of predatory behavior. Derek had been charming and attentive at dinner, but he'd insisted on ordering for both of them, claiming he knew the restaurant well. He'd steered the conversation toward her. Family's routines, her living situation, her class schedule information that would have been useful for future stalking. He was so interested in everything about me, Sarah said, her fair skin still pale, but her voice growing stronger. I thought it meant he really liked me. But now I realize he was gathering intelligence. The movie had been his suggestion to a late showing that would keep them out past midnight, when fewer people would be around to witness whatever he had planned. When Sarah had started feeling dizzy and disoriented during the film, Derek had convinced her that she was just tired, that some fresh air would help. Instead of taking her home, he'd driven to the warehouse district, telling her they were taking a scenic route. By the time Sarah realized something was wrong, she was too drugged to resist effectively. He told me about the other girls while I was tied up, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said they'd fought him at first too, but they'd learned to cooperate. He said cooperation made everything easier for everyone. Emma's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white against her pale skin. He's never going to hurt anyone else again. Dr. Chun, the attending physician, confirmed that Sarah would make a full physical recovery. A psychological healing would take longer, but the hospital had already arranged for her to meet with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. The fact that she was rescued quickly, that she had immediate support from people who believed her, and that her attacker was apprehended, all of these factors will help her long-term recovery. Dr. Chun explained. As dawn broke through the hospital windows, painting Sarah's room in soft golden light, I realized that our family had been forever changed by this experience. Emma's trust in my judgment had been restored, but more importantly, she understood the difference between protective love and controlling behavior. "Dad," Emma said as we prepared to take Sarah home to her parents, "I want to learn some of the safety things you've been trying to teach me. Not because I'm scared, but because I want to be prepared." It was the first time in months that Emma had asked for my guidance instead of fighting against it. 3 weeks later, Derek, whose real name was Marcus Webb, pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a life sentence without parole. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Emma's video recording, physical evidence from the warehouse, DNA linking him to his previous victims, and testimony from Sarah and the other survivors who came forward after his arrest. Detective Martinez called to update us on the case. "Marcus had been operating across multiple states for over 2 years, she explained. "Your actions didn't just save Sarah, they stopped a serial killer who was escalating rapidly." The thought of how many other families might have suffered if we hadn't acted that night was sobering. But it also reinforced something I'd always believed. Sometimes being overprotective isn't paranoia, it's preparation for the unthinkable. Sarah was making remarkable progress in her recovery. The trauma counseling was helping her process what had happened, and she'd found strength in connecting with other survivors through a support group. Her parents had implemented some of the safety measures I'd suggested, including location sharing and regular check-ins during dates. "I'm not going to let what Marcus did make me afraid to live my life," Sarah told us during one of her visits to our house. "But I'm also not going to be naive about the dangers that exist." Emma had thrown herself into learning personal safety with the same intensity she'd once applied to avoiding my protective advice. She'd asked me to teach her basic self-defense, to show her how to recognize potentially dangerous situations, and to explain the security measures I'd been implementing for years. "I want to understand why you do the things you do," she'd said. "Not so I can fight them, but so I can make intelligent decisions about my own safety." We practiced situational awareness during our evening walks, discussed the psychology of predators during dinner conversations, and reviewed safety protocols for various scenarios. Emma was a quick learner, and her questions showed a mature understanding of the balance between caution and paranoia. "The key," I explained one evening as we reviewed, her college class schedule, "is trusting your instincts while staying aware of your surroundings. Your gut feelings about people and situations are usually accurate. The problem is that we're taught to ignore those instincts to be polite." Emma nodded, her fair complexion thoughtful in the lamplight. Like how Sarah ignored her discomfort when Derek insisted on ordering for her. She told me later that it felt controlling, but she didn't want to seem ungrateful. Exactly. Predators count on social politeness to override survival instincts. The relationship between Emma and me had fundamentally changed. Instead of seeing my protective measures as restrictions on her freedom, she now understood them as tools for maintaining her independence safely. She wasn't asking me to be less vigilant. She was asking me to teach her how to be vigilant herself. "I don't want to need protecting forever," she'd said. "I want to learn how to protect myself." It was exactly what I'd hoped for, but had never known how to achieve. Emma was growing into a strong, aware, capable young woman who could navigate the world with both confidence and caution. The irony wasn't lost on me that it had taken a near tragedy to bring us to this point. But I was grateful for the understanding we'd reached, even if the path to get there had been terrifying. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. I just thanked God that Emma and Sarah had survived to learn them. 6 months after that terrifying night in the warehouse, Our lives had settled into a new rhythm, one built on mutual respect and hard-earned wisdom. Emma was thriving in her second semester of college, having chosen to study criminal psychology, with a focus on victim advocacy. Sarah had not only returned to her classes, but had become a powerful voice for dating safety. Awareness on campus. The transformation in both girls was remarkable. Where once they had been trusting to the point of naivety, they were now aware and prepared without being fearful or paranoid. Emma carried pepper spray and had completed a self-defense course. Sarah had learned to trust her instincts and never hesitated to leave situations that felt wrong. "Dad, look at this," Emma said one evening, showing me her laptop screen. She was working on a presentation for her victimology class about predatory behavior patterns. "Professor Williams wants me to present this to the campus safety committee." The presentation was thorough and insightful, drawing connections between Marcus Webb's tactics and the broader patterns of serial predators. Emma had interviewed Detective Martinez, researched similar cases, and even corresponded with other survivors through victim advocacy groups. "This is exceptional work," I told her, genuinely impressed by the depth of her research. "You're helping other people understand what you learned the hard way." "That's the point," Emma replied, her blue eyes serious but determined. "If my experience can help other families recognize danger signs, then something good comes from something terrible." Sarah had found her own way of turning trauma into purpose. She'd started a campus organization called Trust Your Gut, which provided safety education and support for students in potentially dangerous dating situations. The group met weekly, sharing experiences and practical advice for staying safe while maintaining normal social lives. "The thing that surprised me most," Sarah told us during one of her regular visits, "is how many other students have stories like mine. Not as extreme, but situations where they ignored warning signs because they didn't want to seem rude or paranoid." Her fair skin had regained its healthy glow, and while she still had occasional nightmares, the trauma counseling had helped her process the experience without letting it define her future. She was dating again carefully, with proper safety measures, but not allowing fear to isolate her from normal relationships. The Hoffman family had become like extended family to us. Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman frequently joined us for Sunday dinners, and we developed a network of mutual support that strengthened all of us. Sarah's younger brother had even asked me to teach him some basic security awareness before he started dating. "You saved more than just Sarah that night," Mrs. Hoffman told me during one of these dinners. "You saved our entire family's faith that there are still people willing to act when others are in danger." But the person who had changed the most was Emma. My daughter had grown from a rebellious teenager into a thoughtful young woman who understood that love sometimes requires vigilance, and that true independence comes from being prepared, not from being careless. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Emma handed me an official-looking envelope over breakfast, her fair face glowing with excitement and pride. "What's this?" I asked, examining the letterhead from the State Attorney General's office. "Open it," Emma said, barely containing her enthusiasm. Inside was a formal request for Emma to speak at the state's annual Crime Victims' Rights Conference. Her presentation on predatory behavior patterns had gained attention beyond the college campus, and victim advocacy groups were asking her to share her story with law enforcement professionals, social workers, and other families affected by violent crime. "They want me to talk about how family preparedness and trust in parental instincts can save lives," Emma explained. "Specifically, how your overprotective behavior actually prevented a serial killer from claiming another victim." I felt a complex mix of pride and sorrow reading the invitation. Pride in Emma's courage and her commitment to helping others, but sorrow that she'd had to learn these lessons through such a traumatic experience. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I asked, speaking publicly about what happened that night. "Dad," I've been ready for months. This isn't just my story. It's our story. It's about how the relationship between parents and children can literally be the difference between life and death. Sarah had also been invited to speak at the conference, representing the survivor's perspective and discussing her campus safety. Organization. Together, the girls were becoming powerful advocates for a balanced approach to personal safety, one that valued both independence and preparedness. The conference was held in the state capitol, in a hotel ballroom filled with police, officers, victim advocates, prosecutors, and families affected by violent crime. As Emma took the stage, her blonde hair catching the lights and her voice steady despite the magnitude of the audience, I felt a profound sense of admiration for the woman she'd become. 18 months ago, I thought my father was the most overprotective, controlling parent in the world, Emma began, her words carrying clearly through the room. I fought against his security measures, his background checks, his constant vigilance. I accused him of trying to control my life instead of trusting my judgment. She paused, scanning the audience of parents and professionals who understood the weight of her words. But on a Friday night last October, my father's overprotective instincts saved my best friend's life and stopped a serial killer who had already murdered 2 other young women. Today, I want to talk about the difference between controlling behavior and protective love, and how that difference can mean everything. Emma spoke for 20 minutes about the events of that night, the investigation that followed, and the lessons our family had learned about balancing safety with independence. She discussed the importance of teaching young people to trust their instincts, while also trusting their parents' experience and wisdom. The goal isn't to make our children afraid of the world, Emma concluded. The goal is to make them aware of the world, prepared, vigilant, and capable of protecting themselves and others when danger presents itself. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. But what moved me most was watching Emma field questions from other parents and young people in the audience. Her responses thoughtful and nuanced, helping them understand how to implement safety measures without creating fear or resentment. My daughter had found her calling in turning trauma into education, fear into preparedness, and family conflict into mutual understanding. 2 years have passed since that October night in the warehouse district. As I write this, Emma is finishing her junior year of college with a double major in criminal psychology and victim advocacy. Sarah graduated last month and has been accepted to law school, where she plans to specialize in prosecuting violent crimes against women. The changes in our family run deeper than just improved communication or mutual respect. We've learned that love isn't always comfortable, that protection sometimes requires difficult decisions, and that trust must be earned through consistent action rather than demanded through authority. Emma still uses location sharing on her phone, not because I require it, but because she recognizes it as a sensible safety measure. She dates, travels with friends, and lives the independent life of a normal college student. But she does it with awareness, preparation, and the confidence that comes from understanding both the dangers and the safeguards that exist in the world. I used to think independence meant rejecting everything you taught me, Emma told me recently as we reviewed her graduate school applications. Now I understand that real independence means being prepared for anything the world might throw at me. Sarah visits regularly, often bringing other students who want to learn about personal safety or who need support after their own difficult experiences. Our house has become an informal resource center for young people who are learning to navigate the world with both confidence and caution. Marcus Webb was transferred to a maximum security prison in another state, where he'll spend the rest of his life. The other families whose daughters he'd murdered found some measure of closure in his conviction, though nothing can bring back what they lost. Detective Martinez keeps us updated on similar cases, and Emma's presentation materials have been distributed to law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The ripple effects of what you did that night continue to spread, Detective Martinez told me during our last visit. Other families are implementing the safety measures you used. Other parents are trusting their instincts instead of dismissing them as paranoia. You've probably prevented crimes we'll never even know about. But the most important change isn't in the broader world. It's in the relationship between Emma and me. We've learned to see each other clearly. She understands that my protectiveness comes from love, not control, and I understand that her independence comes from strength, not rebellion. You taught me that being careful isn't the same as being afraid, Emma said in her graduation speech last month, speaking to a gymnasium full of parents and students. And that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who see dangers we can't see ourselves. She paused, looking directly at me in the audience, her fair skin glowing under the stage lights, and her blue eyes bright with affection and gratitude. My father used to say that sometimes being overprotective saves lives. I used to think that was paranoia. Now I know it's just love with eyes wide open. As I watched my daughter accept her diploma, surrounded by friends and family who understood the journey we'd traveled together, I realized that the greatest protection I could give her wasn't my constant vigilance. It was teaching her to be vigilant herself. Some fathers never stop watching, but the best fathers teach their children how to watch for themselves. Emma understands that now, and that understanding will protect her for the rest of her life.